I wish I could go back and become a doctor and understand the phenomenon of charisma that happens when you're manic, because you attract everyone to you, men, women, animals. Everyone just becomes very enamored of you because you are radiating this bliss. And that escalates, unfortunately, to a place of promiscuity and reckless sex and encounters you would never in a million years do when you weren't manic.
Dear Family is a podcast hosted by Rachel Steinman, a writer, an educator, and a mental health advocate. And Rachel gets us up close and personal, so we feel a strong connection, familiarity, and comfort with her guests. So settle in and join us as we search for true healing and journey with Rachel and her most interesting guests.
Hello, dear family and friends. I hope you are doing well. I'm thinking of all my West Coast people who are dealing with this unprecedented fire season, which feels even more ominous because of the state of our world. I'm wishing us fresh air and a true slowing down of global warming. I'm also wishing you all the peace in this time of global anxiety. The optimist in me is hoping this is a global shift where we're awakening and we're going to move forward. I can't help but be hopeful. Since recording this episode end of August 2020 with the phenomenal Terri Cheney, she's since published her new must-read book, Modern Madness, an Owner's Manual. She's been written up in People magazine. She's published an article in The Atlantic, and she continues to add to her blog in Psychology Today. She amazes me, and I'm so excited for her to amaze you. Thank you so much for subscribing, sharing, and writing those awesome 5-star reviews, and also for following me on all the social media platforms at Right Now Rachel. That's right with a W. Take care, everyone, and enjoy. Terri Cheney was a successful entertainment lawyer who represented some of the biggest names in the business, like Michael Jackson and Quincy Jones. All the while, she hid her mental illness and the slash marks on her wrists from a suicide attempt. She bravely started writing about her experience living with bipolar disorder after several horrific suicide attempts, encounters with the law, broken relationships, and eventually a stint in a mental health hospital and several rounds of electroshock therapy. The writing led to her first memoir, Manic, which went on to become a bestseller and the basis of an episode of Netflix Modern Love, where Anne Hathaway did a phenomenal job capturing Terry's mania and her depression. In Terry's new book, Modern Madness, an Owner's Manual, she combines clinical research with her own lived experience. Stories like her manic highs accompanied by extreme drinking, driving, and dating. Her new book brilliantly bridges the gap between the one-size-fits-all approach of modern medicine and makes it relatable and valuable for everyone. Those dealing with mental health issues and their family and friends who are often left to pick up the pieces will undoubtedly appreciate her humor and her insight. Terri lives in Los Angeles, teaches personal essay writing workshops, and keeps up her blog, The Bipolar Lens for Psychology Today. I know you are going to love Terri just like I do. Welcome, Terri. I'm so happy to have you on Dear Family. I want to start by telling you that I first read Manic when I was beginning to research and write my own yet-to-be-published memoir. It really helped me understand my mom. It was the first book that I read that I saw my mom so clearly in. You have a really gifted way of sharing a story so that others can relate, even if they are not bipolar. You described your roller coaster existence with such great honesty. By the time this is aired, your new book will have been put out into the world, which is how many years later?
Manic was published in 2008. I did have a book in between called The Dark Side of Innocence. That was about my childhood, growing up bipolar.
I'm so excited to talk about your new book, so welcome.
Thank you so much, Rachel.
Because this is a podcast called Dear Family. I like to begin with my guests telling us a little bit about themselves and their family.
I have a small family. I just have one brother. Both my parents are deceased. My mother died this past year.
Sorry.
Thank you. And my father died in 1997, which was a very hard thing to go through. He was quite ill. So I just have one older brother at this point, and it's us against the world.
Did you grow up in Los Angeles?
I grew up just outside of Los Angeles in a town called Ontario.
You went on to become an intellectual property attorney in entertainment law too. And you worked with clients like Michael Jackson. And your new book, which I absolutely loved, Modern Madness, begins where you are in a meeting and you are attempting to hide the slashes on your wrists. For the better part of your life, you were concealing your mental health issues and you were taking drugs to keep the mania or the depression away. In Modern Madness, an owner's manual, which just came out on September 8th, you say that mental illness is a very long, inarticulate howl, and it needed a voice and it needs words. What was it like to finally come out with the truth?
It was terrifying. The night before Manic was published, I thought of calling my editor and just saying, no, I changed my mind. I can't go through with this. I had kept my mental illness secret from pretty much everyone except my doctors. I think I had done a pretty good job of hiding it, except when Manic came out and it became a bestseller, I heard from a lot of the people I used to work with who usually said something along the uncomfortable lines of, we always knew there was something different about you. We just didn't know what it was. I was never quite sure how to take that comment, but I also heard from thousands and thousands of people with such compassion and applauding me for coming out and being courageous enough to talk about my secret. I don't really consider it courage because I felt like I had no choice. It was either that or die. I could not keep on hiding the way that I was. It was impossible.
How amazing that you went from not telling anyone and then coming out with a book. There's something to that. In my small way, I kind of did the same thing. I started with an essay that was public, and with my own family history, that is. When and how were you diagnosed?
I wasn't diagnosed with bipolar disorder until about almost 10 years after I was diagnosed with major depression, which is so common because you don't go to the doctor when you're manic. You feel great. You feel like you're on top of the world. So mostly the poor doctors just get to see you when you're really morose. But for me, what happened was I was so severely depressed that I went through a course of electroshock therapy. And midway through, it just catapulted me into the most bizarre episode of mania I've ever experienced. And the doctors realized then that there was something more going on. That was 1994.
The same thing happened with my mom. And I know that happens to a lot of bipolar people is they don't want to go to the doctor when they're manic because it feels good. And then your doctor, when you do go, when you're depressed, gives you a antidepressant, which spikes your mania. I think people are talking more about it, so maybe they can recognize it more, but I can see how that happens. You had electric shock treatment, or it's not called that anymore. It's called
ECT.
ECT. That was because you went into the hospital because you were depressed, and you name in your book, which I really think is smart, you name depression as your opponent. I'm going to quote you. When your brain is depleted, a load of laundry can feel more complicated than chaos theory. To someone that's a normie, that means someone that's normal and doesn't deal with depression, that's very hard to comprehend. You call depression very cruel, and it pushed you into the psych ward. Can you just tell us a little bit about the importance of naming your opponent?
I love that question because I do think putting a name to it, getting a diagnosis is so critical. Things just fell into place for me after I got my bipolar diagnosis. I realized That's why I couldn't go to school for 2 weeks in a row when I was a little girl. And then I would come back and go to class and just overachieve. I've had episodes starting as far back as age 7. And getting a diagnosis for me, and I think for anyone, really puts clarity in your life. And of course, it makes a big difference as to how you're treated. Going into the psych ward was very humiliating at first, very shameful. I couldn't believe I was there. I have been in the hospital several times after suicide attempts. Every time it doesn't fit with my picture of myself. There I am with people who very often have it worse than I do, and it's hard to identify. But then what's amazing is you're in a safe place and you become sheltered. And by the end of the hospital stay, most people don't want to leave. You don't want to go back into the big bad world that made you go in there in the first place. So it's very ironic.
I experienced that with my mom. When she first went in, she was terrified, and she would say things like, "You don't want me to be in here, and the people are scary." And then by the end, she loved the art therapy and all the people working there. On the other side of depression comes mania, and you discuss how you had many manic encounters that you don't remember. And I can really relate to that. There have been so many times my mom has done things and she doesn't remember them. You said that your mania was always on display and that at times it led to financial ruin. And I'm going to quote you again. "I'm so practiced at asking men to drink when I'm manic, I could lecture on it at Vassar," which I just loved. Can you explain to the listeners, how does mania push you to be so promiscuous or hypersexual or go on spending sprees, and then later on you don't even remember?
Mania just takes over after a certain period. It begins subtly. It's in a state called hypomania, which actually is what most people think of as mania. You're euphoric, you're blissful, your mind is really working, it's just clicking, and you're making connections everywhere. And you become so charismatic. I wish I could go back and become a doctor and understand the phenomenon of charisma that happens when you're manic, because you attract everyone to you, men, women, animals. Everyone just becomes very enamored of you because you are radiating this bliss. And that escalates, unfortunately, to a place of promiscuity and reckless sex and encounters you would never in a million years do when you weren't manic. Your judgment just goes out the window. And that is the most difficult thing, because you really don't have a good sense of yourself when you're manic. You don't really know how you're coming across. It's very hard to control the reactions of other people. Whatever the brain chemistry that happens during a manic episode, you really don't remember. I often woke up in strange places, and I never got psychotic, thank God. I'm lucky that way. But certainly there have been many episodes where I just didn't know what I had done or with whom I had done it.
The listeners need to read your books to hear more details, because it's kind of fun and salacious. It is really interesting just to think about how your brain chemistry can almost act as if you've suddenly ingested a drug that pushes you to do things you wouldn't normally do when you're not in that state.
I think of it as my brain has been hijacked by this other woman. I call her she. She takes over my personality and my judgment. And unfortunately, I'm wearing her face and her fingerprints, and I'm responsible for any havoc that ensues. So the drug is very much what it's like.
Excuse me for keep talking about my mom, but that's how I can relate. I know my mom was afraid to go on some medications because she liked that mania. Did you ever experience that? Because I know you were a very successful attorney who got a lot done.
Yes.
During some of your times of mania.
First of all, please don't apologize for talking about your mother, because I listened to the podcast where the two of you spoke together, and it was absolutely endearing and fascinating. And I really recommend that people listen to that.
Thank you. That means a lot to me. Thank you.
She's quite a warrior.
So are you.
Thank you. When I first got diagnosed, I was afraid of the side effects and afraid of the cognitive dulling, as they call it, particularly with lithium, once the medication started to work, normalcy was such a relief. Pleasure for me is the absence of turmoil. It's not the bliss and the tremendous happiness that you might experience in a manic episode. It's just the absence of drama. And that became its own addiction in a way. I'm very med compliant. I find it hard to understand when people go off their meds because that's such a stigmatic thing to do. It paints us all with that brush of stigma, like, oh, she went off her meds and got crazy. And so many of us stay religiously on our meds. They just don't work sometimes.
Did you write your New York Times Modern Love piece, Take Me As I Am, Whoever I Am, first, and then that was turned into your book?
Actually, Manic was coming out in a week, and that essay got published in the Modern Love column. I think that's what made Manic hit the bestseller list so quickly.
Amazing.
It was astonishing. And the sudden notoriety, talk about coming out in the New York Times, it was unbelievable. I got really overwhelmed, to be honest with you, because I didn't expect to be hearing from so many people and getting their stories. I felt such a responsibility to respond, and my heart just started to ache with compassion for all the terrifying and difficult things people are going through with mental illness, and wanted to share with me, just to thank me for opening up a door for them that they could walk through and maybe understand what was going on with them.
What was it like having Anne Hathaway play you in the Modern Love series 11 years later on Amazon Prime, which I have to say I absolutely loved? My family watched it with me. I can normally not even get them to sit with me and watch TV. We all watched it together. What was it like, and what happened after the airing of that incredible episode?
It was astonishing when I got the email from the production team that Anne Hathaway would be playing me, because there's no precedent for that.
I know. I have chills just thinking about it.
I just couldn't get my mind around it. And then what was really wonderful was that most of the pieces were not produced in conjunction with the writers, because they wanted a certain distance to be able to fictionalize as necessary. But I talked with the producers, and we agreed that because this episode was about mental illness, they really wanted it to be accurate, and it was important to them, and it was very important to Anne. So I got to collaborate with them somewhat. I got to talk to her, and she was just fabulous. We went to the same college, Vassar, so we had a bond. She really nailed depression in particular. The mania is amazing because of her singing and dancing, which I could never do like that. It captures it very well, but her scene in the bathroom when she breaks down, we talked about that particular moment. I told her sometimes when you get depressed, the mascara wand is just too heavy to hold. You just are so paralyzed, your body and your will, that you can't move it to your eye, and you fall apart in that second. And she just got it. I find it very difficult to watch, frankly, that particular scene, because it's so true to life. But afterwards, it was a lot like after Manic came out, just a slew of messages, and people were so appreciative of the episode. And I didn't hear much criticism, which was really nice, because I loved it.
It moved me to tears multiple times. She did a great job. So I'm glad that you were happy with it.
And she read my book and gave me a great endorsement, which was lovely of her.
Yay for Anne Hathaway. In your new book, you talk about the Prozac years. Can you just tell us a little bit about what are the Prozac years?
The Prozac years for me was a period of, I think it was about 3 years, maybe a little less, where I got on Prozac when it first came out. It was right after I had been diagnosed with major depression, so it seemed like the appropriate thing to do. And it just worked.
How old were you?
I was about 27 years old.
Okay.
Everything just got easier for me, and I expanded my capabilities so much that I could do almost anything, it felt like. There was one time, for example, a partner at my law firm asked me to prepare what they call a motion in limine. It's a motion that deals with evidence at trial. And he apologized that I need it tomorrow night. Well, I stayed up all night and I ended up writing 14 of them. And I laid them in front of his door before he could come into work. You get a lot of kudos for that. It was my hypomanic phase that lasted so long. And then suddenly one day I was under pressure for getting a document filed, and the copy machines didn't work at the office. I found myself screaming at the copy boys, as we called them. I heard this, and it was so unlike me to do that I started realizing, something isn't normal here. Something is wrong. And sure enough, within a couple days, I was depressed again and was never able to make Prozac work the same way for me. It really tugs at my heart to think of those years where I became so proficient and unfortunately raised very high expectations for my performance, which were hard to meet when I was then very symptomatic and episodic.
Which just adds to the spiral of the depression, I'm sure. I also find it so interesting that you had the wherewithal to step back and know this isn't me screaming at these copy boys. And that's what I find so unusual about mental illness. My mom has felt suicidal and yet is so fearful of dying.
Yes. Isn't that strange?
It's strange.
It doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't.
But there is a part of me, and I don't know if it's because I'm a writer, that does step back and observe this happening, even while I'm living it. I don't understand how that happens, how that's even possible mentally, but I've always been a watcher. I've always been an observer because I've always written. I think that stood me in good stead.
The only time I've ever experienced something like that is when I get really hormonal, like maybe around my period, and I feel myself acting out towards my husband or my daughters, and I know I'm not acting rational. So I'm aware of it, and yet I still do it. I can't completely put myself in that headspace, but it feels a little bit like you're aware of it, but you can't control it.
You really expressed something important there. There are 3 words that help me get through life, and the 3 words are, it's depression talking. I got that phrase because of having difficult periods and difficult hormonal issues. And I was able to say, okay, this is going to last probably 3 days, and then I'll be back to myself so I can get through it. When I'm able to say it's depression talking, I can realize that, all right, you usually have 4-day cycles of depression and this will pass. My therapist told me once, human beings can endure anything so long as it's time limited. But when you're in a depression, you think it lasts forever.
Originally, Modern Madness was going to be titled Tell Me Where It Hurts. You talk about how that's all you really need to hear when you're hurting. Now your title is Modern Madness, and the word madness is a bit controversial. What made you change your mind?
This may sound strange, but I love the concept of madness. I love rising above the commonplace and being outside the box and seeing the world from a slightly skewed perspective, like a child almost. I know it will get some flack.
I know people can be prickly about words, but I like it. I think that there's something about brilliance and madness, and I see that. I especially appreciated how your new book is for caretakers and for family members. Mental health issues affect loved ones, friends, family members. You skillfully walk us through terms like mixed state and rapid cycling and hypomania, and then you illustrate it with stories of your own life. So that's, I'm assuming, why it's called an owner's manual. I, believe it or not, did not know what a mixed state was. So thank you so much for that. I definitely have seen my mom go through that, but I didn't know that that meant the rapid cycling. You say that 40% of people with bipolar deal with it, and it's the state that you dread the most.
Absolutely.
So can you tell us about that?
I didn't know about a mixed state either, so don't feel bad. It took me a lot of research. I'm surprised I never heard it from my doctors. I found out about it on my own. It's a concept that's more readily known now. It's also called agitated depression, which is a good term. A mixed state is when mania and depression collide, when you're very, very hopeless and full of self-loathing and you just can't stand yourself, but you have all this manic energy. The reason I dread it the most, you're restless and you're irritable. Not only does it feel bad, but it's also the state in which the most suicides occur because you have the energy to act on those terrible depressed impulses and feelings. My heart goes out to anyone who tells me they recognize a mixed state because it really is tough to live with and it's tough to medicate.
Right, because you're up and then you're down. When people are successful with suicides, they're often not severely depressed because if they're severely depressed, they're likely don't want to even move. So that makes a lot of sense. It's when you have more energy, but you're feeling very sad.
I wrote a piece in my Psychology Today blog that I maintain about really when you need to worry about people and watch them as when they're coming out of a depression. That's when sometimes a mixed state happens, or at least they have, as you say, the energy and the ability to plan, because suicide does take a certain amount of planning. And when people come out of a very bad depression, sometimes they go silent and they don't want to talk to you about how they're feeling. That's when you really need to watch closely. Family members can be incredibly helpful at that time because you feel so alone and so frightened.
You recommend saying, "Tell me where it hurts."
Tell me where it hurts is my cause. I think those 5 words are critical. I don't know if it's necessarily men that do this, although men do it a lot. But mostly what I get when I'm depressed or having symptoms is advice. And I hate advice. I can't do it, for one thing, because I'm too paralyzed. Then I feel guilty because I can't do it. Then I feel like the person is in judgment of me. And it shuts me down. I think advice shuts all of us down. It's well-meaning, and that hurts too, because you know the person is trying to help you and is feeling very out of control themselves because they can't fix you. So if you say, "Tell me where it hurts," you have to sit back and listen and let the person express the darkness that's inside them and the pain. You will just watch them open up. I guarantee it. It can be very hard to listen to a person who's depressed, especially because they say things about the world that can be difficult to hear. They have a very black viewpoint at that point. But "Tell me where it hurts" will make a world of difference.
Can you tell us the snow angel story?
When I was in Santa Fe after my father's death, it was a very rough time. I tried to commit suicide. It was the first story in Manic. It was a very serious attempt, and I should not have survived it, but I did somehow. It was an overdose. Afterwards, I found myself walking one night in the snow, and I came to this park, and I just couldn't move any further. I couldn't take another step. I didn't know where I was. I was lost. I was depressed. I was freezing. I didn't want to go on. So I just lay down in the snow and I thought, I'll just freeze to death. That can't be too painful. You go numb. How bad can it be? But your body rebels at suicide. Your body wants to stay alive, which is one of the gifts I think that we get. So I started just unconsciously or subconsciously flapping my arms and legs when the cold really hit me to the point where it hurt so bad I couldn't take it anymore. And I just flapped them and flapped them. And I ended up getting up and looking around and realizing I'd made angels in the snow. It was another sign that, Terri, somebody wants you to live. There's a reason you're here. And it's to witness this illness and what it's like from the inside out, really tell people what is happening so they understand and hopefully one day can cure it.
You do have a gift with witnessing and sharing it. So thank you for that. When you get really depressed, you suffer from something called psychomotor retardation. It's where you cannot move. Now, it's a little bit different than freezing in the snow and your body rebelled, and right? But your will and your body are almost paralyzed. You say that it's really terrifying and it's one of the worst parts of depression. How do you move through that? And how does it happen?
I'm so glad you asked that, because of all the pieces I've published in my blog, and I have over 1 million readers, that piece I wrote years and years ago about not being able to move during depression has gotten the most responses. It's called psychomotor retardation, and it does mean a slowing down of the body's processes, your mind, your body. I'll give you an example. There's a pen lying on my desk about a foot away. If I'm in a deep depression, I can stare at that pen for an hour, just trying to will my hand to go pick it up. My body will not obey my mind's commands. It's absolutely terrifying. I can't get out of bed. I can't get in the shower. The simplest task, to brushing your teeth, things you just so take for granted in any other time, become physically impossible, or it feels that way. I do think it's, for me, the very worst part of depression. And fortunately, there are a couple drugs that help me. One is called Provigil. That helps me move a little bit. But mostly you have to realize again that it's depression taking over you, because otherwise you think you're dying. You think this must be what hell is like. This must be it.
When you're feeling that, you kind of talk yourself through it by saying, this is depression talking.
I try to. That's the best medicine I have for it.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's so helpful for you to share that, because a family member or a caretaker could look at someone and think, come on, just pick up the pen. Why is that so difficult? And it really is a true phenomenon.
You wouldn't tell Stephen Hawking to just get up out of the chair, Stephen.
Right.
It's a brain illness. It is a true physical illness, and it's never so physical as when you're depressed. You just have to realize that it is not volitional. Family members can be so helpful in that way, to realize that you're not doing this by choice. And if you could get out of bed, believe me, you would. You want to live a normal life. You want to do what other people are doing. It's very painful to feel like you can't.
It took me a long time to get to that point of understanding with my mom, and I have so much more compassion for her now that I understand that everything she's done is because of a mental illness, and it's not her will. Thank you for illustrating that. And thank you also for listening to my podcast episode 50 with my mom. And you're so sweet. You call my mom charming, which I totally agree with. My mom has a great sense of humor, and she's a very creative person. And you've said that people that have bipolar know what it's like to struggle. They're often very empathetic. My mom is most definitely that. She is the person that will give her last dollar to someone on the street. She's always wanting to help others. The list of creative and successful bipolars is very long. I'm just going to name a few. Elon Musk, Carrie Fisher, Kurt Cobain, Ernest Hemingway, Ted Turner, Frank Sinatra, Patty Duke, Winston Churchill, and Demi Lovato. I just love her voice. You said that there's so many positives and advantages to having bipolar, and I really do agree with that. There's high intelligence and high creativity, and also that empathy and having that outsider's eye. When did you accept that bipolar was going to be a lifetime treatment? And do you have anything to say about the list of incredibly successful people with bipolar?
It was a big part of my healing to look up who else was bipolar. Originally, before I wrote Manic, I was going to write a book where I interviewed famous people who were bipolar, because when I started to research it, I was just blown away. I don't think you mentioned Vincent van Gogh, did you?
Oh, yeah. How could I forget Vincent?
There is such a high correlation of creativity and intelligence with bipolar. A lot of people have asked me what I call the magic pill question. If there was a magic pill that you could take to get rid of your bipolar disorder, would you do it? Would you take it? And I struggle with that question, but I think the answer would be no, because I would not be who I am if I weren't bipolar. The words wouldn't be the same. And I love words. I love the humility that it's brought to me, because I was not a very humble person when I was practicing entertainment law and representing people like Michael and Quincy Jones and studios. I knew a lot of people who were not very humble, and it wasn't very pretty. When you suffer a lot, you get that empathy and compassion that you may never have gotten otherwise. It's a much softer and lovelier place to be.
My younger daughter, Molly, said, I love that Grammy's bipolar because she loves my mom's personality. My mom's fun. My mom's the person to get down on the ground and play with the kids. Yeah. I love that Molly was able to see that. Speaking of law, what was the pro bono case you mentioned that went to the U.S. Supreme Court?
That was a case involving detention procedures in the San Bernardino County Jail. It went all the way up and we won, and it was fabulous.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah. And you won. Yay. All right, I'm going to admit something personal to you. After reading what you wrote about the mind-body connection and about Botox, a few years ago, I was noticing frown lines. And I did Botox, which I'm a huge fan of. Anyways, you talk about how smoothing out those lines potentially could be letting your brain know that you're not frowning, and that could potentially be making you happier. I have to say, it could be a combination of, oh, I look better, so I'm happier. But it's a very interesting thought. Tell us a little bit more about the mind-body connection.
My dermatologist actually told me about a study in, I think it was Germany, about the Botox effect, because if you're not able to frown, those signals don't go to your brain. So you don't get the unhappiness impulse, which makes me wonder if people get their smile lines fixed, do they not feel happy as much?
I don't know. That someone needs to do that study.
I think smile lines are beautiful. Mental health is physical health. I think people are realizing, especially during COVID, that you just can't function when you're not mentally healthy. It affects everything in your life. For example, hypothyroidism is a very common comorbid illness with bipolar disorder and depression. When I've had my thyroid adjusted, it's made a tremendous impact on my moods. I don't know why we make these artificial distinctions between mind and body.
I've been so anxious with COVID that my TMJ has unwittingly started. Of course they're connected. Okay. And your stomach is related to your moods. I'm going to switch gears a little bit here. People can really look down on those that take multiple medications. But without medicine, I know my mom would not be able to function. And you say the same thing. But I've also witnessed how my mom is constantly having to tweak things because maybe she'll start feeling manic again and she's unable to sleep, or the anxiety will come on. Can you talk a little bit about that process of tweaking meds and why it's so important to continue to take them?
I can tell you have a close relationship to your mother because you know the lingo. Yes, it's called tweaking, which is what we do to our cocktail. This is another thing I feel very strongly about. Most people get their medication from a primary care physician. If there is any way you can find a psychopharmacologist, and you should be able to, because again, it's a physical disease, a psychopharmacologist manages your psychiatric medications, and they know so much more.
Is that different from a psychiatrist?
No, it can be a psychiatrist.
Okay.
Psychopharmacologist.
Who's also an MD.
Right.
Yeah.
A psychopharmacologist really specializes in the mental health medications. Mine is just retiring. I've been with him for 25 years, so it's heartbreaking. You have to work so closely with your doctor, and I really encourage people and get a little mad at them, frankly, for not talking more to their doctors. I think we have this thing called white coat worship, where we're so afraid to call the doctor. We know the best. We are inside our bodies and minds. You need to be in close contact with your doctor because they can't help you if they only see you every 6 months or once a year. Bipolar disorder and other mental illnesses are constantly changing. Your brain chemistry is constantly changing, and you need to adjust the medications. It's like if you are driving a car, you wouldn't not change the oil. It just makes sense. But it's problematic because psychopharmacologists can be very expensive. And although insurance companies are supposed to treat mental and physical health conditions equally, I'm finding more and more that that's not the truth. As I search for a new psychopharmacologist myself, hopefully that will change in the future, because that's something that should never happen in America.
It feels cruel to not be able to afford medicine that you need. I've interviewed people that have decided, oh, I'm feeling better. So they suddenly stop taking medication, and we know where that leads. Any thoughts on that?
I really hate med noncompliance. It makes me angry. It makes me frustrated. Maybe I'm just a good Catholic girl and I take my medication, but it works, so I take it. I remembered all too well what it was like before. It's the same thing with not drinking. I didn't understand that you had to be sober to be on these medications or they wouldn't work, because you're giving your brain just way too much information with alcohol and antidepressants and other medications. There are choices you have to make when you're mentally ill, and they're hard choices. And one of them is putting up with the side effects of medications, about which I write quite a bit and talk quite a bit, because it can be very scary. I wrote in Modern Madness about a time when I was in court and my breast started leaking milk. What was that about? I wasn't pregnant. I'd never been pregnant. Fortunately, the judge gave me a recess and I got to look at the case. And in the meantime, and I ended up being able to use that case at trial. So that worked out okay, but it was absolutely terrifying. There isn't a side effect that I don't think I've had.
I want to talk about the overused word stigma. I wish there was another word for it, but I don't really know another word for it. You went to a very highly respected Beverly Hills doctor who poo-pooed you when you found out your list of medications, because he couldn't believe that someone as highly accomplished as yourself could be taking so many medications. Here's this doctor in Beverly Hills who is making you feel bad about your mental health and what you're taking. Now, fortunately, you were in a place that you could stand your ground and say, I know I need to take this, and you were able to hold your own. But there are so many people that are not in that position. If someone as educated as a doctor that is able to afford a practice in Beverly Hills is carrying this stigma, how can we battle this? And especially for people that aren't as privileged as you.
It really was a shock, that doctor. He just thought I was too articulate to be mentally ill, was what he said. And he said, look at you, you're successful. What was I supposed to be, a homeless person dragging my possessions into a Beverly Hills doctor?
Which you may have been if you weren't on meds, right?
I would have been, yes. His stereotype was so disturbing to me. I was fortunate enough to be able to give him a copy of Manic, and he sort of changed his tune after that and apologized. I hate the word stigma too. It's overused. I don't know of a better word, but it encompasses way too much for one poor word to handle. There's self-stigma, where you hate yourself. And there's stigma where other people are judgmental and just don't understand and fear you. The best way to combat it is one of the hardest ways, and that's disclosing that you have a mental illness. You don't have to make a big deal about it. You don't have to go into 365 pages of explanation. You can just say, think of it like, I have allergies. You would probably tell someone you're dating eventually that, oh yeah, I'm allergic to milk, whatever. It would come up in conversation. Mental illness doesn't come up enough in conversation. I think it will more after the pandemic. I'm hoping. When people see a familiar face that has mental illness, it's amazing the effect it has. And that's why Anne Hathaway's portrayal was so important, I think. Or anyone's. It could be you that's listening.
Lady Gaga.
Oh, yeah. Just telling someone, this is what I have. What happens is what I call the 6 degrees of separation effect. Inevitably, whenever I tell someone that I have bipolar disorder, I hear my mother does too, or my coworker does, or I have it. That was the biggest shock to me. I came out at a Hollywood party. I told people that I was writing a book on bipolar disorder because I had it. And all of a sudden, I was just the hottest thing at that party because everybody wanted to talk about it. It really does affect everyone. And
it's so important to talk about it, which is what you're doing. You're writing about it, talking about it, blogging about it. And your book is so great. It's so helpful, truly. Last questions that I ask all my guests. Terri, when you were 20 years old, you were at Vassar?
Yes.
If you could write your 20-year-old self a Dear Terri love letter, knowing what you know now, what would you have told yourself?
I would have told myself, Dear Terri, hiding a secret is worse than the secret itself. It took me many, many years to realize that. The shame was so much worse than what was, quote, wrong with me. I wish I had known that at 20. I think my life would have been very different. I may not have become a lawyer even. I think I would have probably become something creative because I would have owned my creativity more.
I really relate to that. I think shame is just so toxic. I do have hope for our younger generation that is talking more about mental health, and I don't think it's as shameful. I do worry about the increase in suicide with our young people. Do you have any thoughts on why you think it's so prevalent?
Anxiety and suicide are skyrocketing among young people. It's absolutely shocking. There's a statistic I learned while I was researching Modern Madness that in the last 15 years, suicide rates among young Black women have risen 182%.
Wow. 82%. Oh my gosh. Just tragic.
You're not reaching the right people. I think a lot of the problem is not so much stigma anymore as just we aren't modeling the right practices for our young people. We need to be talking more and more and more about it.
Well, this feels very dichotomous to move into this next question, but do you have any happiness habits? Is there anything that you do that brings you joy and happiness?
I have so many happiness habits. Well, writing brings me great joy and it's very therapeutic and I just love words. I'm a big Sherlock Holmes fan, so I read Sherlock Holmes and related stories constantly. I love the arts. There are so many things that bring me pleasure. Now that I've redefined pleasure as the absence of drama, I realize I don't have to be manic to feel good. Like the screen behind me, there's a hill covered with ivy, and I look at it, and my heart is just so full.
I'm looking at beautiful windows that you are in front of. Yes, very pretty.
My beautiful little house. I'm very excited about being able to bring a new book into the world. It's so rewarding to work hard at something and see it come to fruition.
And you're helping others, which is such a gift.
That is the best medicine.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, it's been such a pleasure speaking with you. I'm going to have links to your new book, links to everything on the show notes. Thank you so much, Terri.
Oh, thank you, Rachel. I'm really happy I got to meet you finally.
I'm so happy I got to meet you. I look forward to, when this pandemic is over, meeting in person.
Please say hi to your charming mother.
I will. I can't wait for my mom to hear this interview.
Me too.
You take care. Best of luck with your book. I'm so excited for it to go out wide to the world. It made an impact on me. Congratulations.
Good. All right. Well, you keep doing
Bye.
what you're doing. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye. This is Rachel Steinman. For more information or to contact me with any questions, comments, or guest ideas, please check out rightnowrachel.com. That's right with a W. Thank you so much for listening, subscribing, and sharing, dear family. And if you found value in what you've just heard, I would love and so appreciate a great review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Until next time, I wish you love, happiness, and good mental health.